And that is, you never get a second chance to make a first. What's that? You never get a second chance to make a first. Yeah, and I don't know if that's true. Do you think that's true? What do you think? Boy, a lot of confusion on that one. I'm going with it's probably true then. But we do. We jump to conclusions when we meet people. We make assumptions when we examine them or hear them talk, which may be accurate, may be inaccurate. But there is no doubt that our first encounters, our first impressions, leave a lasting impression on the folks that we meet. Sometimes lasting impressions that have an effect upon that relationship for the rest of our lives. Sometimes you never get over a first impression of someone else or they of you. I remember once the wise words, the sagacious suggestions of a chief human resource officer at a Chicago corporation who said to me, Keith, when I conduct an interview, the very last thing I look at with the candidate and examine is their, who? It's their shoes. They look at their shoes. I was dumbfounded because my shoes are like the last thing I look at on anyone, myself or other people. I think my daughter is the only one who really pays attention to shoes. But they were good words. He said, I pay attention to them because it tells me something about their attention to detail from head to toe. And so I brought in, I have a stack of my shoes here. Tom White, the custodian, looked at these and he said, those are the goofiest things I've ever seen. And he said, I've seen you wearing these multiple times, but those are not exactly shiny. And so, there's some truth to it, I guess. What we wear, it reflects who we are and what we pay attention to. And what I can tell you is that after he said that to me, I made sure I always had good, shiny, new shoes whenever I had an interview after that. Where am I going? Well, I'm going in the direction that this made me think about why, when the people who brought together the books of our Christian scriptures, our New Testament, when these were brought together and canonized, why they made Matthew first. Matthew is not the oldest gospel. It's written almost 60 years after Jesus' death. It's written almost 40 years after Thessalonians. It's not the first one. And when you read it, the first 17 verses are pretty boring. It's a bunch of begats. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and they begat so-and-so. It's a genealogy that leads you all the way through. And I understand the theology behind it because Matthew's trying to direct, and there was criticisms of who Jesus was and where he came from. And so Matthew's trying to lay out the lineage that traces him back to the house of David and so forth. I understand the theological implications and necessity for doing this. But I also know that when you write a book and you think about it, the first thing you usually want to do if you're an author is catch the attention of the reader. You want to grab them quickly, and begat doesn't really do that for me. And so I guess if I had been involved in this, I probably would have put a letter like Thessalonians first. Because when I read Thessalonians, it's something that invites me. It's something that's welcoming. Paul says to these people, I give thanks for you every single day. Who doesn't want to hear that? I mean, who doesn't want to hear that somebody else is grateful that they even exist, that you breathe oxygen? Who doesn't want to hear that you have worth and that you have value? I mean, that makes me want to read. That makes me want to get involved. I come for that because we all need to be nurtured and cared for and uplifted. Thessalonians does that. And so I think I would have put it first. Being greeted and being welcomed is what Paul is doing to this church. And being greeted and being welcomed, I think, is what we all need from the church. Commercial organizations recognize this because when you go to Walmart, they always have a greeter at the front door, don't they? Sometimes a bit crotchety, but they always have a greeter at the front door. I want that job someday. Here, have a cart. I'd probably last about an hour. Or you go into certain cafes or Panera, Starbucks. When you walk in the door, the first thing the barista says is, "Welcome to," and they're all trained to begin to know you by name. To know you by name. You know, it's interesting. God, if you look at the story in Exodus where Moses asked God's name, God's resistant. God doesn't give a name. God says, "I am," which is nothing. I just am. They made it into God's name, but God is resistant. Because when you have a name, when you're known, somebody has a piece of you. In the old Hebrew theology, somebody owns a piece of you. We have a connection. We are interconnected when I know your name. You see, in our culture and society, there are a lot of us who like to flit in and flit out. I mean, people do that in churches all the time. They come in and then they zip out the side doors. And yet, none of us really want to travel anonymously. None of us want to come in and not be noticed, to be inconsequential or oblivious. All of us, I think, desire, especially in an electronic age, where we're so disconnected and we move at such a fast pace, all of us have a desire to have a family, to have a home, to have a place where we belong, to where we can come. Kind of like that popular television sitcom of a few years back, Cheers, where everybody knows your name. Everybody knows our name. And the opening part of Thessalonians does that for me. The problem is, like those who organized our scriptures, putting Matthew first, I think we in the church often have other things besides welcoming, embracing, caring, loving, relating to people. We have other things on our mind. We want to talk about doctrine. We want to talk about right or wrong. We want to talk about whether people believe things exactly right. We want to talk about correct thinking and right teaching. Or we want to talk about numbers. Get them in the door and welcome them so that we have greater numbers. I don't know that Jesus was ever about that. And when that's the case, I suspect society sees through our disingenuous actions. But for Paul, the first thing he does in all but one of his letters, the first thing he does is welcome and embrace people and give thanks for them, because he knows that people can't be changed. People can't have a connection. Our souls and our spirits cannot merge and meet if we are not accepted as we are. Whoever you are or wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We long to hear that. That I don't have to show my driver's license, and I don't have to show my passport, and I don't have to show an ID of any kind. I am simply welcomed. And to miss this not only overlooks our calling, but I think it overlooks the power we have that we come together and belong together. You know, there is power in numbers. There is power. We talk about not just one person praying, but multiple people praying. As we come together and form family and form community, it is a significant thing because you can feel people be uplifted, changed. To miss this misses our calling to be family and community to one another, loving, accepting, and considerate. Think about it. When you were a child, or even as an adult, when you made a mistake or things weren't going very well in your life, what you didn't want to hear from a mother or a father or a parent when you went to talk to them or cry with them or be held by them, what you didn't want to hear are the words, "I told you so." Did you? I mean, don't you? I watch... Even here in church, I watch moms and dads with their little kids, and I say, man, I wish I could crawl into somebody's lap like that. You know, and just be held, because we hold children so unconditionally. It's a great image, to be accepted and to be loved and to be welcomed, warts and all. Similarly, I am struck by the comment often made by our military personnel, especially those who have been in combat. You know, when you talk to military people who've been in combat, they will tell you that in the midst of the fight, they aren't fighting for their country, they're not fighting for their flag. What are they fighting for? The person next to them. You know, when you shed all that other stuff, what does it really boil down to? In the midst of the strife and the fighting and the struggles and the despairs that we all share, each other. What a wonderful image and challenge for the church. I love the passage in Romans where Paul describes the church as the place where we laugh and weep together. I love that. Where we unashamedly can laugh and cry together. No pretense. Just laugh and weep together. Not judge or critique, not make fun of or ridicule, not shun or ostracize those who disagree with us or think differently from us or express their theology in variant ways from us, but laugh and weep together with us. I mean, that really is the bottom line for our expression of faith. It's just unfortunate that if you read surveys, that's not how most of society sees us, sees the church these days. Over the past 9 months or so, our church council has been looking very diligently at who we are as a church, where we might go as a church, what that implies for our staffing and programming and so forth. And in the process of doing that, we examined many surveys, many demographical studies that included St. Pete Beach, not just Pass-A-Grille, but St. Pete Beach, and over towards Isla, and it took in Tierra Verde. And we looked at all the people there and their responses to these credible organizations that surveyed them regarding churches and religion, why they do go, what they're looking for, why they don't go. And I think, barring none, everybody was caught by one response. Because one question is, if you don't go to church, if you don't belong to a church, why not? And most respondents said, because there is no good church in my area. Which could mean a lot of things. It might be accurate, it might be not. I mean, most of us think we have a good church, right? But it asks me, or it challenges me to ask myself, are we doing all we can to reach out to people, to let them know they are welcome, they're encouraged to be here? Because deep down in my heart, I still believe that people want a place to belong, that people want what the church has to offer, a warm and welcoming place to explore and to grow personally in your faith. Which may be why the most important thing we do every Sunday is form the church. And you know, when you form the church, every week the church is different. You create and recreate the church. You are never the same people this week that you were last week, and this church is not the same this week as last week. We think of it as static, but it isn't. It's a living organization. And we prove that because the most important time in the worship is when we form community and welcome each other at the beginning. That's what you're doing. You're just not greeting people. You're reforming and recreating the church in this day, in this time, and in this moment. You see, when we walk through the door, we don't walk through the door to just see friends, but to make friends. Not to come to church, but to weekly form and reform the church. The living presence of what Paul says is the body of Christ in the world. Representing a Christ, a Jesus who welcomed men and women, he welcomed old and young, he welcomed children with adults, he welcomed Samaritans besides Jews, Greeks along with Romans, daring in spite of all society preached and society and religion taught, he said, I no longer call you strangers, I call you, thank you, friends. I mean, do you think about that? That's a very theological statement. I call you friend. This is what I suspect is the real bottom line for who we are called to be and what we are called to do. So the question is, are we doing all that we can to do this right? Are we making a good first impression? Because, as they say, we may not get a second chance. And that would be too bad for us all. supposed to be playing. I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.